Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Historian and educator, Dr. Alan Singer. Regular Media Watch as often as he can make it and as often as we can get him here. And we are taping the Wednesday before our usual Monday air, being brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and Zoom. And still in the news, as well it should be, the mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York. And there have been a gazillion others, at least 14, maybe more, since Uvalde, that particular weekend. And of course, there's the, thoughts and prayers from the Republican Party. And there are actually ongoing hearings right now. The heartbreaking thing that struck me was the 11-year-old young girl in Uvalde who had to smear her friend's blood all over her and pretend she was dead so the shooter wouldn't kill her. And so she managed to survive. But journalistically, I saw a piece, I think it was an op-ed. There were two New York Times pieces, one by a teacher, professor, West Coast College. I should have pulled it, but from memory, I'll tell you she's a former journalist and professor. And what her thesis was, the carnage that's caused by AR-15 is so horrendous that if the general public saw what that weapon does, then there would be no debate about banning those weapons because it's such horrendous carnage. Her vote was, yeah, we need to make that stuff public. My vote is yes, they need to make it public. And Bob, you were saying it was reminiscent of Emmett Till's mother.
Right. I mean, Emmett Till being the, how old was he at the time? 16 years old?
He was younger. He was
14
12.
to 15, 14 to 15.
Yes. And he was beaten up and killed and dragged and horribly physically mutilated after allegedly.
A bullet through the temple that went straight through.
And by White, who thought that he had, what was the incident, Alan? He had
that he had disrespected a white woman while he was shopping in a store.
Yes, that was the amount. That was yeah.
He whistled at her. That was the charge.
Yeah, and
what recanted later, many years later,
and then recanted the recant, but that's okay.
Yes, exactly. But the point is that at his funeral, his mother decided to leave the casket open so that the world could see what they had done to him. And the picture is famous. It's run millions of times in the press, and the face is unrecognizable as a face.
Yeah,
that's how bad it was, and that's what I guess what you're saying, Eric. If people see,
yes,
the damage.
I'm agreeing with this woman, professor who wrote it, former journalist, and she said she knows it would cause harm and hurt to the families, and her feeling is the good and the rationale for motivation to ban these weapons and do something about gun violence would outweigh the harm it might cause the individual families. Interestingly enough, there's a young lady who founded, she's now in Ontario, Canada, I believe, who founded what's called the Kim Foundation, whose purpose is to help children that face the trauma of war, the struggle of life, death, and traumatic injury. And Kim is her first name, and that's the foundation. I didn't pull the article, but she's the young lady, people of our age will remember that we saw her running naked down a street in Vietnam in a site that a AP photographer managed to capture her naked with 60% of her body being burned by napalm. And it spread globally. That one shot brought home the horrors of napalm and the Vietnam War. And she wrote a piece talking about how she had to come to terms with being the napalm girl in that photo. And it took all of her 50 years, I think she's 50 years old now, to come to terms with it, but now actually welcoming the fact that she is that girl, because the visual horror of her trauma affected the globe and affected her life and her role in life on helping other traumatic victims of war, primarily children. And so she related her suffering to the current trauma that the families are suffering. And she too was saying the horrors of Uvalde on those young bodies should be visible to the rest of the world, so that people can see that this is not abstract stuff. And those two pieces, journalistically, humanistically, I felt we needed to share. We can open the floor for discussion.
Well, I just wanted to point out, Eric, that we're taping on June the 8th. And today is the 50th anniversary of the photographer taking that photo.
Oh,
So I mean, we're
Probably why that piece ran.
yes, and her full name is Fan Thi Kim, PHUC, Fook.
Mhm.
And you know, as it said, she ultimately survived her napalm injuries. But yeah, without going into extending this too long, yes, that was a very effective photo when it ran, and said a lot about what the war was doing to real human beings. Seeing the picture of a naked little girl running away from a napalm bombing.
Her relating her suffering to the suffering of those dead children in Uvalde is powerful. And I can see why she's saying, you people need to look at what the carnage that's being caused by these AR-15 when they, I mean, children especially horrendously. And guess what? So many of these mass shootings end up being children and young people, the victims. So I don't know, they're holding hearings in Washington now about what happened in Uvalde and Buffalo. Yesterday, today's Wednesday, I think it was Tuesday, the son of one of the 86-year-old activists said, my mother's life mattered. What you people are doing in these halls, if you don't have the will and the guts to do something to make sure it really does matter and pass these laws, you should step aside and let somebody else lead who will. And I'm happy he said that, but I don't think it's falling on deaf ears. It's falling on deaf ears on one half of that chamber. So
The Republican Party has so far blocked any, as people commented earlier, the AK-47 was banned in the United States from 1994 to 2004. And Republican Party has obstructed any gun control in the United States since that time. And I know Senator Schumer from New York, the Democrat, is trying to come up with some kind of compromise that the Republicans will accept. It's not clear they will accept any meaningful compromise. They want full access to guns, and they have completely butchered the United States Constitution to be able to justify their claims.
yeah, look, the Second Amendment, we can get into the Second Amendment. We should get into the Second Amendment. This whole bit about AR-15s are weapons of defense, and we needed to shoot critters. Some guy, some Republican senator or House member was saying, I need to shoot the varmints on my ranch, and I need an AR-15 to shoot the varmints on my ranch. And somebody that said we need it for self-defense. That's a crock of bull. It's a load of shit. And people should not accept that. And that debate. So the bit about banning these weapons, and they banned them, you're correct.
Yeah.
They banned them, and the 10 years that they were banned, mass shootings decreased, deaths by mass shooting decreased. When the ban lifted, Joe Biden's right. Mass shootings increased, death by mass shootings, primarily by the weapon of choice, not the AK-47 anymore, but its cousin, the AR-15. Now we got tons and tons of people dying. And so Steve Kerr, the coach of Golden State. Alan, you had something about Steve?
Yeah,
Steve
Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, who are now in the NBA championship, though by Sunday they may have already be champs, came out with an incredibly forceful statement that there must be action to ban these weapons, as did Gabe Kapler, the manager of the San Francisco Giants, and both refused to participate in Star Spangled Banner opening ceremonies as a protest, and very, very powerful protest. Matthew McConaughey, the actor, has also taken a powerful stand, and very, very prominently. So we're getting people taking these stands. But so far, not one Republican anywhere in the United States has backed off. And that's what's very scary. But added to that, the Supreme Court is now deciding whether New York City can license people who apply to hold
A permit. For
get a permit for concealed weapons.
Mhm.
And the current right-wing cabal on the Supreme Court looks like it's going to throw it out, saying, just let the guns out on the street. I mean, we are living in a very dire time. And I think it's important to note that in 1939, the United States Supreme Court made it very clear that the Second Amendment did not give people the unlimited right to have a weapon. And that was what the Constitution meant until 2008.
Right.
And then in 2008, what you have is right-wingers on the Supreme Court start throwing out the meaning of the Constitution to argue that people should have really unrestricted weaponry. They allowed it in a case in Washington, D.C., where initially they said, as long as you keep in your house, you can have anything you want. And then they stripped it and stripped it and stripped away our protection with the support of right-wing Republicans, elected officials, to the point that New York City may be in a position where people are just going to walk around with guns.
Yeah, I was
This
saying,
is very scary.
that's what I was alluding to in the last show when I was saying, for years, the Second Amendment's right to bear arms was construed with well-regulated militia state being able to regulate those arms. And I claimed erroneously that it was in the 50s or the 60s where it started to change. You're correct, it was 2008. It lasted for 70 years.
Yeah.
When the first ruling was made, when it first went to the Supreme Court, 1939, 70 years before those right-wing judges decided they were going to reinterpret what that clause meant in the Second Amendment. So pendulum needs to not wait to be swung. We need to figure out a way to push it back to that original interpretation so that we can ban these weapons. All these talks about background checks and raising the age, all that is just talking about crap around the edges of what the problem is. Ban the damn assault weapons.
Right.
Just ban them. You don't have to worry about having any school drills. Ban them. You don't have a Second Amendment right to have an AR-15 that's a weapon of war, period.
Look,
Just to check with you, Eric, just one quick question, since you know, you're a veteran. With this weapon, if you get shot by it, you're not going to the hospital, you're dead, right? This is not a, if it hits you, you're gone, correct?
If you one shot on the one shot, because they can be made to do one shot or burst, one shot, you might survive. Burst, get it.
That's what I mean.
Burst sprays your entire body, you ain't recovering.
That's what I mean.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Bob, the AR-15 and those types of rifles, the bullet it doesn't fly like an arrow. It tumbles, doesn't it? Which causes more destruction.
So there's like a ripping action as it hits
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, and I think I'm correct on this, and it's been a long time since I had to deal with military weapons.
The equivalent of the AR-15 that I had to qualify on was an M16.
Yeah.
An M16 is the US's version of the AR.
Same thing, yeah.
Same weapon, semi-automatic. They call it semi-automatic because you can actually set it to single fire or you set it to burst. When I first picked it up, it was on burst. I pulled the trigger, bullets just sprayed. I mean, I don't even know if it sprayed near the target. It just sprayed, okay? And I'm telling you, it was a rain of bullets, just one touch of the trigger. And so the weapon is designed to put mass bullets on in the direction of any target. The more, the merrier. And so that's not a defensive weapon that you're protecting yourself at home. That's a weapon of war to kill as many people as you can. And so the fact that they want to claim that that's a Second Amendment right to own that and be able to just go in the store and buy it, no, that's a misinterpretation of the Second Amendment. But that's another discussion that we need to sit down with some lawyers, because all those different parsings of this phrase and that phrase, but you were able to ban the weapon before. That meant constitutionally they can be banned. We should be able to ban the weapon again. So I don't know how much time we have, because I think we wanted to at least touch on some other Supreme Court things, especially pertaining to abortion. What was that ruling, Alan, that you wrote that piece on? Dobbs?
Okay. Well, what happens in Dobbs is the Supreme Court is attacking the United States Constitution. And it's attacking two crucial amendments, the 9th Amendment and the 14th. The 14th Amendment guarantees due process to all people in the United States. But the 9th Amendment says that, yes, the federal government has certain powers, and yes, the states have certain powers, but other rights are reserved for the people. And whether they're listed or not, people maintain those rights. Well, the Warren Court correctly interpreted the 14th Amendment protection of due process and the 9th Amendment protection of what they called unenumerated rights to mean that Americans could decide who they wanted to marry. Some states had banned interracial marriage. It means that Americans could decide to use birth control. Connecticut actually had banned birth control. It meant that women could control their own reproductive citizens, consulting a woman and her doctor. So what the court said is that is what they meant by unenumerated rights. And that's protected by the 14th Amendment. The current right-wing cabal wants to rip that out. And what they're saying is, no, you don't have any rights that aren't mentioned. Which is interesting because, again, the right to have an AK-47 is not mentioned. There are a lot of rights that aren't mentioned, but they don't have to be mentioned. That's the way the Constitution was written. But what we have are people, an ideological group that wants to do away with abortion rights. And to do away with abortion rights, they're going to strip away the meaning of the Constitution. That will take the constitutional interpretation back to the 1950s. That could take away the Miranda rights. That could take away due process in courts. So it's a very, very scary direction that this court has taken.
Okay. And that also applies to voting rights.
Yes, very much so. They already rolled back voting rights in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It said that states with a history of discrimination had to get prior approval from the Justice Department before they could enact any change. Supreme Court threw that out under the argument, well, we don't have racism anymore.
Yeah,
and
right.
Because of that, states across the country have tried to take away same-day voting registration, have tried to take away mail-in ballots, have moved polling places far away from where minority people live, have gerrymandered districts. Apparently, we do have racism in the United States still.
Do we, Alan?
The
Really?
Supreme Court doesn't see it.
Are you sure about that, Alan? We still have
I'm
racism.
pretty sure.
Okay.
I mean, just what Texas tried to do. I mean, with the limitations on where you can vote, how you could vote. Yeah, it just shows the hole left by the Supreme Court's decision. But go ahead, Eric.
Just what Texas tried to do on abortion, which Oklahoma has taken it one step further, which we went on about in the last show. There was
I'm
something.
prepared to argue. Well, I want to go back in history. After the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850, what we had was African-American and white abolitionists saying we're not obeying that law and we're not obeying the Supreme Court rulings in Dred Scott. And they actively resisted the law. I think the blue states have got to say these Supreme Court decisions are invalid and we're not going to follow them. Let the Supreme Court come and let people have guns in New York, but the police in New York are going to take those guns away. And I think we've come to a point in the United States where people have to say these interpretations are completely illegitimate and local and state governments have to disobey them.
Well, we can actually mount a disobedience campaign by actually sending these laws back up to the Supreme Court over and over again by disobeying them, filing court suits so that they have to keep ruling on these things, can't we? I mean, you come up with a different case, a different scenario. You say, no, under this clause of the Constitution, which you seem to be ignoring, I can ban this and you can't allow that. And
that's what the opponents of abortion did. They just kept on rewriting laws until they got the Supreme Court to buy them.
Yeah, so I'm saying we need to do that same thing all over again so that they have to keep hearing these cases. And hopefully by then we can have somebody chipping away at the fact that, oh, you might be misinterpreting this document. That's why this keeps coming back at you. I'm not saying it will work, but it seems to have worked for them, even though it took them from 1974. When did they pass Roe? 74?
73.
Yeah, took them from 73 till 2022, because we're expecting this decision sometime next month, correct? In July?
Yeah.
When they're going to abrogate.
It could be any, actually it could be any day.
Yes, could be this month. So yeah, I'm not going to say, okay, just because they won this round, we're going to give up. Just like I still say we can fight to get an AR-15 or any semi-automatic weapon banned using constitutional law as our argument. They might continue to turn us down, but we have to keep going back. How much time we got?
We have almost exactly 5 minutes left. The only issue with your that is that the Supreme Court can arrogantly turn down whatever they don't want to hear.
That's true, but 3 judges, what's the number? If 3 says we should hear this, right? Can't be 1. I think it has to be 3. They can't just arbitrarily, right? They can't.
I'll have to check on that. I don't know that number. Yeah, you're right. There is a
number that says,
yes,
no, we need to hear this. So
there is sort of a negative quorum there, whereas, right, you can have a minority push something forward. Yes.
No, you can't turn this down. We need to hear this.
Yes.
So
the other constitutional issue we're facing right now is, again, the January 6th hearing. Today is Wednesday. Tomorrow they're starting the public hearing. I don't know. Does anyone who's scheduled to testify?
I don't have the original lineup. What I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in the non-televised hearing, Rudy Giuliani has already testified. A couple of other high-ranking Republicans that were subpoenaed actually showed up. The lawyer, the guy who helped foment the coup, he showed up, but then I think he took the Fifth Amendment. What's his name? You guys remember the crazy guy who said, oh yeah, you can select your own electors.
The crazy guy describes a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. It could be Navarro, could be Bannon.
Not Navarro. Okay. Navarro got hit with contempt.
Right.
But Mark Meadows did not get hit with contempt by the commission. So it's up in the air who's going to do what. I'm guessing we're going to, when we air next Monday, they will have already been televised. I don't know whether they have more than one day or whether it's going to be ongoing, but I do believe at least 2, maybe 3 networks will be carrying some prime time, some whatever. Fox has definitely said they're not carrying it, which is no surprise to us. Yes. As Joy Behar said on The View, I think Fox would never carry it because they're co-conspirators, something to that effect. So now
Yes.
they're not going to hear something that points out that they're co-conspirators in a coup to help overthrow the government. But
Now, I also understand in Georgia, there are a case moving on with the district attorney, Fannie Willis, who's been a very, very powerful figure, trying to expose efforts by Donald Trump to circumvent the law. Really criminal attempts by Trump.
the Fulton County DA has launched that probe into election interference by Donald Trump's lawyers and co-conspirators, and I think the Trump campaign in trying to do something to the national election for president back in 2020. And it's what the charge is, either voter interference or election interference. That grand jury has been impaneled, and as we speak, they've already heard from the former Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger of the state of Georgia, who took that infamous phone call from Donald Trump about, I need you to find me 11,000 or so votes, Brad, so we're winning in this state, right? You know you can find that, right, Brad? I'm paraphrasing the phone call, guys. but
that's essentially what it was.
That's the phone call that Fannie Willis, the DA's name, young Black female who's very sharp. Her colleague says she takes no prisoners. She doesn't care who you are, what race you are. You break the law, she's coming for you. She don't care what office you hold. You break the law, she's coming for you.
And we have about 1 minute.
Her grand jury has been impaneled. They've started testimony. She says, if it goes right, she hopes to have this grand jury wrapping up late July, early August. But by the fall could be September, early October, could be before the November midterm elections. We shall see what we shall see. But I think the hearings are going to be televised. You might be seeing something about the Proud Boys colluding with the Oath Keepers. You might be seeing some video footage of the British documentarian who actually walked in with the Proud Boys filming them. Because the Proud Boys are the Oath Keepers. One of the other group, he actually walked in with them filming as they went, but they invited him, I'm told. So should be an interesting hearing. I think I'm going to watch some of it.
Okay.
So,
And we're
anyway,
I'm also watching the basketball game.
we're out of time, I guess. This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on Twitter and YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And their guest and friend, Alan Singer. Thank you for having me.
See you next time, folks. Stay safe.